The air hung thick with the acrid stench of ozone and burnt plastic, a smell that had become disturbingly familiar over my career. I stepped over a tangle of severed conduits, my boots crunching on shattered glass and pulverized drywall. This was the remnants of Dr. Aris Thorne's bioengineering lab, a place once hailed as a beacon of innovation, now a testament to destructive force. Catastrophic failure, Reed, the lead investigator, a man with tired eyes and a perpetually furrowed brow, stated without looking up from his tablet. He gestured vaguely at the devastation. Pressure readings went through the roof. Looks like a containment breach, maybe a runaway reaction. I nodded, my gaze sweeping across the scene. The lab occupied the entire top floor of a secure wing within the university's research complex. Blast doors, designed to withstand a siege, lay twisted inward, their reinforced steel peeled back like tinfoil. Inside, everything was either vaporized, melted into grotesque sculptures, or flung across the cavernous space. Burn patterns radiated from a central point, a reinforced chamber that was now little more than a gaping maw. It was a scene of utter, indiscriminate chaos. Suicide, or a tragic accident, the lead investigator continued, his voice echoing in the hollow space. The bioengineer was known for pushing boundaries. Reckless, some would say. I didn't comment. My job wasn't to speculate on motive or character, but to sift through the physical aftermath, to read the story the debris told. And this story, at first glance, screamed accident. The sheer scale of the destruction, the way the high-security protocols had been overwhelmed, all pointed to an event beyond human control. Yet, a flicker of unease already stirred within me. It always did when the initial narrative felt too neat, too easy. My team, a handful of forensic technicians, moved with practiced efficiency, documenting, collecting, bagging. They were good, thorough. But I needed to see it myself. I needed to feel the resonance of the place, to let the details speak directly to me. The bioengineer's body had already been recovered, a grim necessity given the instability of the site. It was en route to the University Medical School cadaver storage facility, a place I knew well. The facility, a labyrinth of cool, sterile corridors and heavy steel doors, maintained an environment designed for preservation and meticulous examination. That's where the true story often began. The ride across campus was short, the silence in the forensic van broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. My mind replayed images of the lab, the specific charring on a ventilation duct, the way a workbench had collapsed, not inwards, but slightly to the side. Tiny details, easily dismissed, but my internal ledger kept track. At the facility, I bypassed the usual intake procedures, heading straight for examination room 3. The attendant, a quiet man with kind eyes and perpetually gloved hands, gave me a somber nod as I entered. Doctor, this was where the lab's story intersected with the man's. The bioengineer, brilliant, reclusive, now reduced to a grim subject. I pulled back the sheet. The devastation to the body was extensive, consistent with a close proximity, high-energy blast. Severe burns covered most of his exposed skin, his clothing largely incinerated. But as I leaned closer, my eyes scanning every inch, a peculiar detail snagged my attention. On the bioengineer's left forearm, amidst the widespread charring and blistering, was a small, perfectly circular burn mark. It was distinct, about the size of a dime, and significantly deeper than the surrounding blast injuries. It looked less like a consequence of the explosion and more like a direct, focused contact burn from an intensely hot, precise object. And within the center of that perfect circle, almost imperceptible to the naked eye, I saw it, a tiny, glittering fleck. It wasn't ash, nor was it a fragment of the lab's ubiquitous debris. It possessed a metallic sheen, a faint, almost iridescent quality that caught the fluorescent light. My gloved fingertip hovered inches above it. This wasn't consistent with a general explosion. A blast creates widespread, irregular trauma. This mark, this fleck, spoke of something else entirely. Something deliberate. Something prior. This wasn't merely an accident. This wasn't a tragic miscalculation. This was the work of someone who understood the destructive power of Thorne's research, someone who had left a signature, however faint, on the victim himself. The game had just changed. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a pale, clinical glow on the chrome tables. I stood beside the medical examiner, a stoic man whose hands moved with practiced efficiency, dissecting the layers of what had once been Aris Thorne. Cause of death, preliminarily, severe blast trauma and thermal injuries, the medical examiner stated, his voice muffled by his mask. He gestured with a scalpel towards the torso. The sheer force was considerable. Bone fragmentation, internal organ disruption, widespread charring. I nodded, my gaze fixed on the body. The sheer scale of destruction at the scene hadn't quite aligned with the specific patterns of injury I was observing now. Notice the pattern here, the medical examiner continued, pointing to a section of the upper chest. While the external damage is extensive, consistent with the inferno, the internal injuries around the pulmonary system suggest a more focused, perhaps localized, concussive force. Almost as if he was directly impacted by something specific, not just caught in a general blast wave. My brow furrowed. So, not just the ambient force of the explosion? Precisely. And the thermal damage, while severe, doesn't uniformly match the degree of blast trauma. There are areas of deep, focused burns that appear almost cauterized, rather than simply incinerated by a general fire. He paused, adjusting his mask. The timeline of events here is complicated. It looks like he sustained a specific, intense impact before or during the initial phase of the thermal event, rather than just being engulfed by it. I leaned closer, my eyes scanning Thorne's charred skin, the remaining fragments of his lab coat. My gaze drifted to his hands, specifically the calloused pad of his thumb. Even through the damage, I noticed a faint, almost shimmering residue. It wasn't ash, nor was it a common lab contaminant. I reached for my portable micromagnifier. "Hold still," I murmured, more to myself than to the medical examiner. I carefully scraped a minuscule sample onto a sterile slide. Under the lens, the residue resolved into tiny, iridescent flecks, like microscopic shards of opalescent mica. But the crystalline structure was distinct, almost alien in its geometric perfection. It shimmered with an inner blue light under the focused beam. "What is that?" the medical examiner asked, peering over my shoulder. "I don't know," I admitted, "but it's not from his lab. Not from any standard lab I've ever seen." I bagged the slide. This wasn't a byproduct of Thorne's bioengineering. This was something else entirely, an uninvited guest at the scene of the supposed accident. It deepened the uneasy knot in my stomach. Leaving the sterile chill of the cadaver storage facility, the crisp autumn air outside felt almost jarring. The new evidence, however minute, had chipped away at the accident theory. The medical examiner's observations, combined with my discovery, painted a picture of something far more deliberate. Back at the temporary command post set up near the lab, a colleague was sifting through initial reports. He looked up as I approached. "Anything conclusive from the medical examiner?" "More questions than answers," I replied, pulling off my gloves. He noted a localized concussive injury inconsistent with the overall blast, and specific thermal damage patterns. "And I found this." I held up the bagged slide. "A unique mineral dust, not part of Thorne's known lab." "Inventory." The colleague whistled softly. "So, not an accident after all?" "I'm not ruling anything out yet, but the pieces aren't fitting together neatly." I reviewed the preliminary interview summaries he'd laid out. "What have we got on Thorne's professional life? Anyone with a grudge?" He tapped a name on the printout. Our initial sweep of his professional circle flagged a few individuals. First, a Dr. Silas Vance. He's a colleague from a competing research institution, known for his own groundbreaking work in synthetic biology. Apparently, Thorne and Vance had a history of intense academic rivalry. Thorne had a reputation for being fiercely competitive, often secretive about his breakthroughs until he was ready to publish, which infuriated Vance. I absorbed the information. Academic rivalry, a common, yet potent, motive. Any specific points of contention recently? Word is Thorne was on the verge of a major breakthrough, something even bigger than his previous work. Vance apparently felt Thorne was withholding crucial collaborative data, effectively trying to scoop him on a shared research pathway. Vance was vocal about his frustration, even threatened to expose Thorne for unethical research practices, though no formal complaints were ever filed. Interesting, I mused. And anyone else? There's also Amaya, a former research assistant who worked under Thorne about 6 months ago. He was let go abruptly. Her exit interview mentioned untenable working conditions and unethical treatment. She claimed Thorne was overly possessive of his research, demanding unreasonable hours, and taking credit for her contributions without proper acknowledgement. She's since found work elsewhere, but the bitterness was evident in her statement. A disgruntled former employee. Another classic. Did she have access to the lab? Limited, but yes, during her tenure. After her termination, her access was revoked, but she'd know the internal workings, the security protocols, and perhaps even Thorne's habits. I stared at the two names. Vance, the rival, driven by professional jealousy and the potential loss of a career-defining discovery. Maya, the former assistant, fueled by resentment and a sense of betrayal. Both plausible. Both had reasons to resent Thorne's competitive nature and secretive work. And now, with the medical examiner's findings and my own discovery, the possibility of a sophisticated, deliberate act of murder loomed larger than ever. The picture was still hazy, but the outlines of a more sinister narrative were beginning to emerge. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent promise of the intricate puzzle that lay ahead. A minuscule, almost invisible speck. Found it embedded in the epidermal layer of his forearm, post-mortem. It's not organic, not metal, and certainly not anything we'd expect to find in a bioengineering lab. It's synthetic, almost like a microscopic piece of hardened plastic, but with a unique crystalline structure. The speck was barely visible to the naked eye, a testament to the ME's meticulous work. A non-lab-related trace element, embedded in Thorne's arm, suggesting a direct, intimate contact with something alien to his environment. The plot, as they say, thickened. My first stop for leads was Dr. Silas Vance, a contemporary of Thorne's and a known academic rival. His lab, a stark contrast to Thorne's high-tech fortress, was a maze of bubbling beakers and handwritten notes. Vance was a wiry man with a perpetual frown etched into his face, his eyes darting nervously as he spoke. Thorne was intense, Vance began, gesturing vaguely with a gloved hand. Brilliant, yes, but ruthless. He'd step on anyone to get ahead. My research, for example. He tried to discredit it, steal my funding. We had words, many times. Heated words. Did those words ever escalate to physical threats, Dr. Vance? I asked, observing his fidgeting hands. He scoffed. Please, read. I'm a scientist, not a brawler. And besides, I was at a conference in Geneva when the incident occurred. Plenty of witnesses. His alibi checked out, but his resentment was palpable. He had motive, certainly, but lacked opportunity for the physical act, and more importantly, the specific expertise to stage such a complex event. Next, I sought out Maya, Thorne's former research assistant. He was a young woman, sharp and intense, but now she seemed diminished, her shoulders slumped. I found her in the names, Vance and Maya, lingered in my mind like the afterimage of a flashbulb. Both had motive, opportunity, and the kind of intimate knowledge of Thorne's lab that would be necessary to pull off such a precise act. Yet, something about the chaotic scene in the lab, the calculated destruction, didn't quite fit the profiles I'd built for either of them. Jealousy and betrayal often led to impulsive, messy acts. This felt cleaner, despite the devastation. More engineered. I spent the next 48 hours submerged in the minutiae of the lab's wreckage, my own facility transformed into a temporary shrine to Thorne's final moments. The burn pattern on the console, the microscopic trace element I'd meticulously scraped from beneath a shattered component, these were my anchors. My colleague, a quiet specialist in materials science, ran the spectral analysis while I watched, a silent sentinel by the humming machines. The air grew thick with the metallic tang of ozone and the subtle, almost imperceptible scent of burned plastic. The initial scans provided a broad spectrum, a jumble of common elements. But I knew better than to stop there. I instructed the specialist to refine the focus, to isolate the anomalies, to push the machine to its limits. We repeated the process, narrowing the parameters, until a distinct signature began to emerge, sharp and undeniable on the display. It wasn't organic. It wasn't a byproduct of the known chemicals Thorne worked with. It was synthetic, complex, and utterly foreign to the lab's inventory. Run it against the industrial polymers database, I told the specialist, my voice barely a whisper, the tension coiling in my gut. This was it, the deviation, the unexpected variable. The machine word, processing, cross-referencing millions of data points. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, a match. A rare, synthetic polymer, designated poly-X7. My eyes scanned the details, extreme heat resistance, high tensile strength, used primarily in specialized aerospace components and high-end industrial tooling where conventional materials fail under extreme stress. The description was precise, clinical, and sent a jolt through me. This wasn't something you'd find in a university research lab, not even one as well-funded as Thorne's. It was a material designed for environments far more demanding than anything Thorne was publicly known to be experimenting with. My previous suspects, Vance and Maya, faded into the background. This polymer spoke of a different world, a different kind of motivation. It wasn't about academic rivalry or personal vendettas, it was about industry, about applications on a scale Thorne's work had only hinted at. My gaze drifted to the whiteboard where I'd mapped out Thorne's known affiliations. One name stood out, circled heavily: Omnicorp. Omnicorp was a behemoth, a global conglomerate with its fingers in everything from advanced robotics to pharmaceutical development. They had been Thorne's primary corporate sponsor for the last 5 years, pouring immense capital into his theoretical bioengineering projects. I remembered the internal memos, the vague project descriptions, the almost aggressive secrecy surrounding their involvement. This polymer, Poly X7, felt like an Omnicorp signature. They were known for pushing boundaries, for proprietary materials, for aggressive R&D. I spent the rest of the day in a flurry of activity, sifting through financial records and corporate filings, piecing together the timeline of Omnicorp's funding and the vague descriptions of the projects they were supporting. My contact at the university, a grizzled administrative assistant who knew where every skeleton was buried, provided me with the name of Omnicorp's liaison for Thorne's projects, a man named Davies. The Omnicorp headquarters loomed over the city, a polished monolith of glass and steel that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The lobby was a symphony of hushed efficiency, all muted tones and hushed footsteps. I stated my purpose to the receptionist, and a few minutes later, Davies descended in a silent elevator. He was impeccably dressed, his suit crisp, his smile practiced, his eyes a little too bright. "Reed, a pleasure," he said, extending a hand that was firm, almost aggressively so. "Please, come up. We'd been expecting you." "Expecting me?" I asked, raising an eyebrow as we stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, sealing us in a bubble of corporate silence. He chuckled, a dry, unamused sound. "Well, not you specifically, of course. But the university informed us that an investigation into Dr. Thorne's unfortunate incident was ongoing. We're eager to assist in any way we can." His office was on the 30th floor, all panoramic views and minimalist design. He gestured to a leather armchair opposite his massive, uncluttered desk. "Coffee? Water?" "Just the facts, Mr. Davies," I said, declining with a slight shake of my head. I pulled out my notepad, the pen poised. "We've identified a unique synthetic polymer at the scene, Poly X7. It's a material known for its use in specialized industrial applications, often proprietary. Are you familiar with it?" Davies' smile didn't waver, but a flicker, swift as a hummingbird's wing, crossed his eyes. "Poly X7, you say?" I don't believe that's a material we directly employ in any of our publicly disclosed projects. Omnicorp has a vast portfolio of advanced materials, of course. It's possible it's used in some capacity, perhaps in a subcontractor's equipment." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk, his voice smooth. "But Dr. Thorne's work was largely theoretical, focused on biological pathways. I can't imagine why such a robust industrial polymer would be present in his lab." "Unless it was introduced," I countered, my gaze unwavering. His research was funded by Omnicorp. What specific projects were you sponsoring that might require such a material, even indirectly? Our investment in Dr. Thorne was primarily in his bioengineering division, Davies explained, his words flowing easily, almost too easily. We believed his research into accelerated cellular regeneration held immense promise. The applications, as you can imagine, could be revolutionary. We provided funding, equipment, even access to some of our specialized analytical tools. But the day-to-day operations, the specific materials he used, those were largely his purview. Access to specialized analytical tools, I repeated, making a note. Did that include any equipment that might utilize Poly-X7 components? He considered this, his head tilted slightly, as if genuinely pondering. Potentially. Some of our high-resolution microscopes or spectrographic analyzers might incorporate such materials for structural integrity. But those would be minor components, not something that would leave a significant trace. He spread his hands in a gesture of openness. Look, Reed, we're as invested in understanding what happened to Dr. Thorne as you are. He was a brilliant mind, a valuable asset. His death is a significant loss to Omnicorp, both professionally and financially. We've already dispatched our internal security team to conduct their own assessment, purely for insurance purposes, of course. His overly cooperative demeanor was a shield, a wall of agreeable platitudes designed to deflect genuine inquiry. He was offering information, yes, but it felt like carefully curated information, a narrative he wanted me to follow. The mention of his internal security team felt like a subtle warning. I'd like a list of all equipment Omnicorp provided to Dr. Thorne's lab, including any and all proprietary materials used in their construction, I stated, pushing past his carefully constructed facade. And I'd like a full breakdown of the specific projects Omnicorp was funding. Beyond the general accelerated cellular regeneration description. Davies' smile tightened, a fraction of an inch. I'll see what I can compile. Some of that information is highly proprietary, but I'm sure we can find a way to assist the authorities. He stood, signaling the end of our meeting. We value transparency, Reed. We have nothing to hide. As I walked out of the gleaming Omnicorp tower, the city lights beginning to glimmer against the deepening twilight, I knew he was lying. He had everything to hide. The air outside, even with the exhaust fumes, felt cleaner than the sterile, controlled environment I just left. My path back to the lab, cutting through the university grounds, took me past the imposing, windowless brick edifice of the University Medical School cadaver storage facility. This wasn't a lab accident. This was a deliberate act, and Omnicorp was now at the center of my web. The synthetic polymer, a microscopic sliver of evidence, felt less like a clue and more like a tether, pulling me into a current far stronger than I'd anticipated. The director at Omnicorp had been a smooth operator, his denials as polished as his office, but the tremor in his voice when I mentioned the material had been unmistakable. He was hiding something, and it wasn't just corporate espionage. This was bigger. Back in my own sterile lab, the hum of the mass spectrometer was a familiar comfort, a constant in a world suddenly tilting. I fed the polymer fragment into the machine, watching the spectral lines dance across the screen. It was complex, layered, not a standard industrial compound. The unique molecular markers suggested a highly specialized application, perhaps even experimental. My gut churned. Thorne's work had been groundbreaking, potentially world-changing. If this polymer was connected, it meant the stakes were astronomically high. I worked late, tracing potential manufacturers, cross-referencing databases that few outside my field even knew existed. The city outside my window had long since settled into its nocturnal rhythm, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows. My eyes burned, but I couldn't stop. The polymer was a whisper of a design, a signature, and I was determined to read it. Finally, a lead. A series of obscure patents, filed under a subsidiary of a lesser-known biomedical firm, hinted at a similar polymer structure used in advanced biological containment systems. Specifically, a prototype designed for the long-term preservation of organic tissue samples in extreme conditions. My mind immediately went to Thorne's lab, the complex array of bioreactors, the very nature of his research. My sedan was parked under a flickering street lamp, its paint reflecting the distorted light. As I reached for the door handle, a sudden roar ripped through the quiet. Headlights flared in my periphery, blinding and aggressive. It missed my car by inches, a gust of displaced air buffeting my face, and slammed into a row of recycling bins further down the block, sending plastic and cardboard scattering. The driver didn't stop, accelerating with a guttural growl from the engine, vanishing around the corner before I could even fully register its make. This wasn't some random act of road rage. The street had been empty. The swerve had been deliberate, aimed. Someone knew I was getting close. The patents had led me to a specific variant of the polymer, one supposedly used in experimental preservation chambers. It was a long shot, but if anyone had access to such specialized equipment, it would be a large university with a robust research program. The facility itself was a stark, utilitarian building, devoid of any aesthetic flourish. A junior assistant, a young man with nervous eyes, directed me to the section housing the older, more specialized containment units. They're mostly for historical samples now, he mumbled, adjusting his spectacles. Some of the older experimental units are still here, though. As I examined the thick, reinforced panels of the dormant units, I ran my gloved hand over the surfaces, searching for any trace, any indication. The polymer I was looking for wasn't a surface coating, but an integral part of the chamber's construction. I found nothing definitive, but the trip wasn't a waste. The sheer scale of the preservation technology, the intricate systems involved, only reinforced the complexity of Thorne's work and the material I was tracking. Returning to my personal lab, a sense of unease settled over me. The door was locked, the alarm armed. Everything appeared normal. But as I stepped inside, a faint, almost imperceptible scent hung in the air, something metallic, like ozone, but with an underlying sweetness I couldn't place. My gaze swept the room, cataloging every detail. The microscope was exactly where I'd left it, the slides stacked neatly. My coffee mug, however, was subtly out of place, shifted a fraction of an inch to the left of its usual spot on the counter. It was a detail so minor, so insignificant, that anyone else would have missed it. But I didn't miss things. Someone had been here. They hadn't taken anything, hadn't obviously disturbed my work. They had simply been. It was a message, subtle but clear, I know where you are. I called Maya. He picked up on the third ring, his voice tight with apprehension. Reed? Is everything all right? No, I said, my voice low, it's not. I think someone was in my lab. a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Oh God. Reed, I need to tell you something. I should have said it sooner, but I was so scared." Her voice wavered, on the verge of breaking. Before the accident, I saw someone. Not Thorne, not anyone I knew. Late at night. They were accessing his lab. Not through the main entrance, but through the service tunnel that connects to the old research wing. And they had a keycard. A specific one. Too purposeful. And they were carrying something. The synthetic polymer, the targeted accidents, the subtle breach, and now, Maya's terrified confession. This wasn't a lab accident. I was no longer just investigating a death, I was hunting a ghost, and the ghost was hunting me back. The cold, hard truth of it had settled in my gut. Thorne hadn't made a mistake. He'd been made a victim. Maya's confession, fragmented as it was, confirmed a breach, a deliberate act that went far beyond mere negligence. This wasn't a tragic miscalculation, it was a meticulously orchestrated execution, designed to look precisely like one. My task now was to unmask the architect of that illusion. I retreated from the sterile quiet of the facility and immersed myself in the cacophony of data. My workstation, a temporary command center established in an auxiliary office near the main lab, glowed with the stark blues and greens of system logs. Thorne's lab was a fortress of bespoke engineering, every sensor, every ventilation duct, every pressure plate designed to his exacting specifications. This made the killer's task harder, but also, paradoxically, left a more intricate digital signature if one knew how to read it. Hours blurred into a single, focused stream. I sifted through terabytes of environmental control data, air pressure differentials, gas mixture ratios, temperature fluctuations, humidity levels. The initial reports had focused on the catastrophic pressure surge, the explosion of the containment unit. But I wasn't looking for the bang, I was looking for the whisper that preceded it. My fingers danced across the keyboard, scrolling through the labyrinthine logs of the lab's atmospheric regulation system. Thorne had been working with highly volatile compounds, requiring an inert gas environment, specifically a precise argon-nitrogen blend. The system logs, at first glance, showed a gradual decline in argon levels, consistent with a leak or a system malfunction. But then I saw it, a pattern, subtle as a breath on a cold windowpane. Not a steady, natural leak, but a controlled bleed. A calculated reduction in argon, followed by a corresponding, equally subtle, increase in oxygen. The system's internal diagnostics, programmed by Thorne himself, had registered these as minor fluctuations, well within acceptable parameters for a self-correcting system. But when viewed in sequence, they painted a different picture, a deliberate, multi-stage manipulation. The oxygen enrichment wasn't enough to trigger an alarm on its own, nor was the argon depletion. But together, within the closed environment of Thorne's primary containment unit, with the specific compounds he was working with, they created a volatile cocktail. The final ingredient, I suspected, was the electrical surge that initiated the reaction. I pulled up the power grid diagnostics for the lab. Another anomaly. A localized power spike, not from the main grid, but within the lab's internal circuitry, traced directly to the containment unit's power conduit. It wasn't a random surge, it was a targeted pulse. This wasn't an accident. The killer hadn't just sabotaged the lab, they had re-engineered the environment for destruction. To truly understand the finesse of this manipulation, I needed a benchmark, a point of comparison for bespoke environmental controls. It wasn't the grisly contents I was interested in, but the complex, highly specific environmental systems that maintained the integrity of the biological specimens. These facilities, like Thorne's lab, relied on intricate air filtration, temperature regulation, and humidity control systems, all designed to maintain an unnatural stasis. I spent an hour with the facility manager, a stoic woman with tired eyes, asking about system redundancies, failsafes, and the parameters for alarm triggers. She explained how even minor deviations in temperature or air circulation could compromise specimens, leading to rapid degradation. The systems here were designed for absolute stability, with multiple layers of monitoring. Any way to trick them? I asked, gesturing to a complex array of pressure gauges and flow meters. The manager gave a dry chuckle. Not without leaving a massive trail. These systems are constantly cross-referencing. You'd have to override multiple sensors simultaneously, and even then, the central log would flag it as a critical event. Her words echoed my suspicions about Thorne's lab. The killer hadn't overridden the systems, they had co-opted them. They had used the very mechanisms designed for control to orchestrate chaos, keeping the changes just below the alarm thresholds, making them appear as benign fluctuations until it was too late. Back at my workstation, the pieces truly began to interlock. The remote trigger. That was the last crucial element. The precise timing of the oxygen increase and the electrical surge, 37 minutes apart, suggested a programmed sequence. I delved into the lab's network logs, searching for any external connection, any anomalous login, anything that could have initiated such a sequence. There it was. A ghost in the machine. A brief, encrypted data packet, originating from an IP address that bounced through 3 different obscure servers before terminating in a dead end. The packet itself contained only a single, executable command. A system-level instruction to initiate a pre-programmed sequence within Thorne's environmental control daemon. It was a digital key, turning Thorne's own safeguards against him. The precision of the atmospheric shift, the targeted power pulse, the remote trigger, it all screamed of someone who didn't just understand Thorne's research, but who knew the very architecture of his digital and physical fortress. This wasn't a random act. This was a master craftsman, meticulously laying out a trap, using Thorne's own tools against him. The killer hadn't just wanted Thorne dead, they wanted his work destroyed, and they wanted it to look like Thorne himself was to blame. My gaze hardened. This wasn't just a murder, it was an act of profound betrayal. The lead detective's words had burrowed into my thoughts, taking root. Co-opted. Not broken, not bypassed, but twisted, made to serve a new, sinister purpose. It elevated the killer from a simple opportunist to a meticulous puppet master, pulling strings within Thorne's own intricate design. My initial assessment of a sophisticated act had been a gross understatement. This wasn't just smart, it was deeply intimate. I'd spent the last 36 hours submerged in Thorne's digital footprint, my eyes gritty, the air in the temporary evidence processing room thick with the scent of stale coffee and ozone. The lab's servers, once a fortress of data, were now open, their secrets spilling onto my screens. The raw data was a labyrinth of algorithms and encrypted pathways, each one a testament to Thorne's genius, and now, to his undoing. The subtle fluctuations that had triggered the fatal sequence, the ones just below the alarm thresholds, screamed of intent. This wasn't an accident. It was a perfectly choreographed destruction, designed to look like one. He didn't just want the research, I mumbled to myself, the words tasting like metal. A tech analyst, slumped over a console nearby, grunted in acknowledgement without looking up. He wanted to stop it. To prevent it. The theft of groundbreaking research was one thing. A common, ugly motive in this industry. But the elaborate setup, the sheer audacity of turning Thorne's safeguards against him, suggested something far more desperate, far more personal. Why go to such lengths to make it look like an accident if the goal was merely acquisition? No, the objective wasn't to take Thorne's work, it was to ensure it never saw the light of day. Or, perhaps, to ensure Thorne didn't expose something else entirely. I chased that thread, sifting through communication logs, project timelines, and external data transfers. Thorne's digital life was meticulously organized, almost obsessively so. Every byte had its place, every folder a clear designation. Which made the anomaly stand out like a flare in a blackout. They weren't corrupt data, they were intentionally disguised. A faint prickle of recognition traced my scalp. Thorne had a habit of embedding secondary data streams within larger, seemingly innocuous files, a digital breadcrumb trail I'd seen in other, less sinister, cases of intellectual property protection. The initial decryption revealed not the expected research notes, but a fragment of an internal memorandum, dated 6 months prior. It wasn't from Thorne's lab, but from Omnicorp, referencing ethical protocol review and project expansion into non-consensual biological applications. My breath hitched. This was a direct contradiction to Thorne's publicly stated research focus. Not GPS coordinates, but a specific indexing system, a kind of internal library reference. I cross-referenced it with Thorne's personal planner, which I'd recovered from his home. There, scrawled in his precise, almost calligraphic hand, was a matching string, followed by a single, unsettling phrase: last resort. The dead don't talk. The coordinates pointed to an address I knew, but wouldn't have expected. It was a place where silence was absolute, a repository for what was left behind. A place rarely disturbed by the living. The air inside the facility was a frigid, sterile blast, smelling faintly of formaldehyde and something metallic, like cold steel. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a stark, shadowless glow on the rows of stainless steel compartments. The lead detective had given me a look when I'd explained my hunch, a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect for my persistence. He'd sent a patrol officer to secure the perimeter, but he hadn't joined me. Good. This was my lead. I followed the indexing string Thorne had left, navigating the labyrinthine corridors. Each door was numbered, each compartment labeled. It wasn't one of the active research units, but an older, less frequently accessed section, usually reserved for long-term storage or unclaimed remains. With a gloved hand, I pulled the heavy, insulated handle. Inside, beneath a pristine white sheet, was a form. And tucked neatly into a small, sealed, tamper-evident pouch, secured with industrial-strength tape to the underside of the stainless steel tray, was a data chip. It was small, unassuming, but I felt its weight in my palm like a lead sinker. Back in the relative warmth of my vehicle, parked discreetly down the street from the facility, I connected the chip to my secure field reader. The data streamed across the screen, a torrent of Thorne's final thoughts, his fears, his desperate attempt to leave a record. It was a comprehensive log, meticulously detailed, chronicling his growing unease. He discovered that Omnicorp, while publicly funding his humanitarian-focused bioengineering, was secretly diverting resources to a parallel, clandestine project. This secondary project, codenamed Chrysalis, was a terrifying perversion of his own work, designed not for healing, but for control. He detailed his attempts to confront Omnicorp's executives, his threats to expose them, and his mounting suspicion that his lab was compromised. "They want to weaponize it," Thorne had written in the final entry, timestamped just hours before his death. "Not just my discoveries, but the very mechanism of biological manipulation. Chrysalis isn't about saving lives, it's about owning them. I cannot let this happen. I will release everything." This wasn't just about a brilliant scientist's murder. It was about a conspiracy, a terrifying misuse of power, and a desperate race against time. And the killer wasn't just protecting stolen intellectual property, they were protecting a secret that could reshape the world in a horrifying way. The game had just changed. Dramatically. The words from Thorne's hidden message still echoed in my mind, a chilling counterpoint to the hum of the server racks. Whistleblower. It wasn't just murder, it was an assassination designed to silence, to bury a truth I was now obligated to unearth. My determination hardened, sharpening my focus to a razor's edge. I sat hunched over my console, the glow of the screen reflecting in my tired eyes, surrounded by the digital detritus of Thorne's life and death. The task ahead was clear: cross-reference every access log, every employee profile, every scrap of technical expertise against the specific, intricate sabotage that had killed Thorne. I had the blueprint of the lab, the schematics of the modified equipment, and the precise sequence of events that led to the engineered catastrophe. Now I needed the architect. I started with the access logs for Thorne's high-security lab. The system was robust, designed to track every entry and exit. Days blurred into a relentless stream of data points. I filtered by time, by clearance level, by the specific areas within the lab that showed signs of tampering. The list, initially sprawling, began to contract. Technicians, research assistants, security personnel, most were quickly eliminated. Their access didn't align with the specific points of vulnerability, or their profiles lacked the advanced skill set needed to reconfigure highly specialized bioengineering apparatus without leaving a trace. Then came the employee profiles. I wasn't just looking for physical access, I was looking for intellectual access, for someone who understood Thorne's work intimately enough to weaponize it. The sabotage wasn't brute force, it was surgical, a precise manipulation of Thorne's own groundbreaking research against him. This required a deep, almost intuitive understanding of the specific protocols and experimental parameters he was working with. I cross-referenced the narrowed access list with the internal project manifest. Who else had hands-on knowledge of Thorne's most sensitive projects? Who had the theoretical background to not just operate the equipment, but to subtly alter its core function? The circle tightened further. A handful of senior researchers, a couple of lead engineers, and the Omnicorp liaison. The Omnicorp liaison. David Thorne. No relation to Aris Thorne, according to the records, but the name always snagged in my thoughts. He'd been present during the initial walkthroughs, impeccably dressed, asking pointed questions that, at the time, I dismissed as corporate due diligence. Now, I saw them differently. I pulled up his profile. Standard corporate executive background, MBA, stints in various tech firms. But then, a subtle anomaly. A gap in his employment history, a few years unaccounted for before he joined Omnicorp. It was short enough to be overlooked, just long enough to hide something. My fingers flew across the keyboard, digging deeper, past the public-facing resume. I accessed a restricted database, a network of interagency intelligence that sometimes yielded results on individuals with less than transparent pasts. It was a long shot, but my gut screamed at me. The screen flickered, then populated with new data. My breath hitched. The gap wasn't empty. Covert operations. Specialized intelligence gathering. And then, the clincher, a flagged connection to a notorious intellectual property theft case years prior, involving a rival bioengineering firm. The details were vague, redacted in places, but the implication was stark. Stolen research. High-stakes corporate espionage. My eyes scanned the text, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying inevitability. This wasn't just a corporate suit. The tension in the room thickened, pressing in on me. I stood, stretching the stiffness from my back, my gaze fixed on the profile of David Thorne. The man wasn't just a suspect, he was the inside man. He knew the system, he understood the science, and he had the ruthlessness to execute a flawless, untraceable murder. But I needed more. I needed to understand the exact nature of Thorne's final project, the precise biological mechanism he was about to expose. The digital files were comprehensive, but there were physical components, specialized samples, and unique anatomical insights that would have underpinned such groundbreaking work. Thorne's research wasn't purely theoretical, it had tangible, biological roots. I grabbed my jacket, the decision firm in my mind. There was one place where I might find the missing pieces, where the physical reality of Thorne's bioengineering could be laid bare. A place that held the raw, anatomical truths necessary to understand the ultimate implications of his work. The air was heavy with the sterile tang of formaldehyde, a scent that always reminded me of finality. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pallid glow on the long rows of stainless steel tables and the shrouded forms beneath them. The facility's supervisor, a gaunt, quiet man, simply nodded, used to the strange requests of my profession. Looking for anything specific, Reed, the supervisor asked, his voice hushed, echoing slightly in the cavernous space. Just cross-referencing some older research parameters, I replied, my eyes scanning the meticulously organized shelves of anatomical models, preserved organs, archived biological samples. Thorne's work was complex, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible in cellular regeneration and targeted biological manipulation. If the killer had used Thorne's own research against him, the method would be subtle, almost imperceptible. My gaze settled on a series of archived research binders, labeled with dates preceding Thorne's move to the high-security lab. These were the foundational documents, the early blueprints. I pulled one out, its cover cool beneath my fingertips. It was about a weapon hidden in plain sight, and I was about to find out exactly what it could do. The word whistleblower was a brand, burned into my consciousness. My determination, already a sharp edge, honed itself further. The killer, arrogant in their precision, had to be exposed. My office, usually a sanctuary of methodical thought, became a strategic war room. I paced, the worn linoleum creaking underfoot, my gaze sweeping over the scattered notes and magnified images of Thorne's lab. The killer knew the intricacies of Aris Thorne's work, the specific vulnerabilities of his advanced polymer research. That was my leverage. I needed to create a phantom, a false lead so enticing, so threatening, that only the architect of Aris's demise would recognize its true danger. I crafted the rumor carefully. It wasn't about the why of Aris's death, but the how, or rather, my fabricated understanding of it. I let slip a seemingly casual observation to a junior investigator, loud enough to be picked up by the lab's omnipresent, if often ignored, security systems. I've isolated a critical anomaly, I mused, gesturing vaguely at a projection of Aris's reactor schematics, a signature polymer from the core itself. Initial spectroscopic analysis suggests it could be the key to stabilizing the phase shift matrix Aris was working on. A breakthrough, really. We're calling it Compound Omega. I emphasized the last words, letting them hang in the air, a silent challenge. The junior investigator, bless his earnest heart, scribbled it down, completely oblivious to the bait I was casting. The breakthrough was a lie, a precise blend of technical jargon and plausible discovery. It implied I was not only close to understanding the mechanism of the lab's catastrophic failure but was actually advancing Aris's work, potentially completing the very project he was killed to suppress. For safekeeping, I claimed, the volatile new sample, along with my working notes and a fabricated analysis report, would be moved to a secure, environmentally controlled location. Its constant low temperature, restricted access, and macabre isolation made it an ideal, if unsettling, staging ground. The cold, sterile air, the rows of shrouded forms, it would be a fitting backdrop for the truth to emerge. I waited, the tension a taut wire strung through my chest. Hours stretched into the agonizing crawl of a single night. I monitored the facility's feeds, a cold cup of coffee beside me, the only sounds the hum of the server racks and the rhythmic click of my keyboard. My internal clock was a countdown. I knew the killer would move. They had to. Just before dawn, a flicker. A security camera feed from the facility's auxiliary entrance showed a figure, cloaked and moving with a practiced stealth that spoke of familiarity, not random intrusion. The gait, the subtle hunch of the shoulders, it was the victim's brother, David Thorne. He took the bait. The air was frigid, biting at my exposed skin, carrying the faint, metallic tang of formaldehyde. The rows of sheet-draped gurneys stretched into the gloom, silent witnesses to countless lessons. David moved with quiet urgency, his footsteps muffled by the thick soles of his boots. My heart hammered, a drum against my ribs, but I remained motionless, a predator observing its prey. He reached the locker, fumbling with a set of lock-picking tools. He was good, efficient. The tumblers clicked. He opened the door, his hand reaching inside for the fabricated sample. That was my cue. "Read," he hissed, his voice low, strained. "What the hell are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question," I replied, stepping closer, letting him see the glint of the small, clear evidence bag in my hand. Inside, a cluster of microscopic, iridescent fibers. "This isn't about your brother's breakthrough, David. It's about his murder." His gaze flickered to the bag, then back to my face, a mask of forced composure. "Aris's death was an accident. The investigation is closed." "Not for me," I said, my voice steady. "The Compound Omega was a ruse, David. A very effective one. What you were really looking for was this." I held up the bag. The trace polymer, found adhering to the scorched lab equipment in Thorne's facility. The same microscopic threads I'd painstakingly extracted from the residue at. The scene of the colleague's accident last month. And the exact chemical signature you, and only you, would recognize as the key component of the phased plasma delivery system Aris was designing. His jaw tightened, a vein throbbing in his temple. He knew. I saw it in his eyes. He recognized the trap, and he was caught. Aris was going to expose them, wasn't he? I pushed, my voice gaining momentum. The bioweapon development. The unethical trials. He called himself a whistleblower. And you, David, you were tasked to neutralize him. He staggered back, bumping into a gurney, the sheet-draped form beneath rustling slightly. His composure shattered. Omnicorp. A faction within it. They'd been developing it for years. Aris found out. He threatened to go public, to expose everything. They told me to handle it. I didn't want to read. He was my brother. But they left me no choice. His eyes were wide, pleading, but they held no remorse for Aris, only for his own predicament. The truth, finally out, was even more horrifying than I had imagined. It had settled deep into my bones, a cold, hard truth that solidified around the brother's desperate confession. He slumped against the metal gurney, his wrists now cuffed behind his back, the plastic zip ties a stark contrast to the tailored suit he'd worn just hours before. The sheet-draped form beneath him remained oblivious, a silent witness to the unraveling of a carefully constructed lie. A federal agent, a stern woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit, stepped forward, her voice low and precise as she read him his rights. I watched the brother, his face pale, his eyes darting, no longer meeting mine. He had given me a name, Omnicorp. A faction within it. He's stable, a medical examiner's assistant reported, checking the brother's vitals with a detached professionalism. Shock, mostly. And dehydration. I nodded, my mind already racing, piecing together the fragments. Aris found out the brother had choked. He was found out what? That they were developing for years. It had to be related to Dr. Thorne's groundbreaking research, the very thing that made his lab a target, and ultimately, his death a necessity. This wasn't just a familial dispute or a jealous sibling's rage, it was a corporate assassination, cloaked in the guise of a lab accident, with implications that stretched far beyond the confines of this frigid room. The lead detective, a grizzled man who'd seen more than his share of human depravity, approached me, his expression grim. Federal jurisdiction now, read. They're taking him. Everything he said, every piece of evidence, is going straight up the chain. I understand, I replied, the words feeling inadequate. The chain didn't just go up, it branched out, snaking through boardrooms and government agencies, touching lives I couldn't yet fathom. The meticulous patterns of destruction I'd observed in Dr. Thorne's lab, the almost poetic precision of the murder, suddenly made sickening sense. Someone with vast resources, with intimate knowledge of Thorne's work, had orchestrated this. The brother was merely a lever, a desperate man caught between a rock and a corporate monolith. I watched as the federal agents led the brother out, his footsteps echoing in the corridor before fading into the distant murmur of the outside world. The door hissed shut behind them, leaving me in the stark quiet of the facility. My phone vibrated, an incessant barrage of messages and missed calls. The news had broken. Not the full story, not yet, but enough to send shockwaves. The apprehension of Dr. the Media, a ravenous beast, was already circling. I could almost hear the helicopters buzzing over the university grounds, the frantic clamor of reporters demanding answers. A senior federal investigator, a woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, entered the facility, her eyes sweeping over me with an unnerving intensity. "Read," he said, his voice devoid of inflection. "Your detailed report on the lab's anomalies was instrumental. We're moving fast. Omnicorp is already in damage control, but we have enough to start peeling back the layers." "What about Dr. Thorne's research?" I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. The core of it, that they were developing, remained a dangerous unknown. She paused, her gaze distant. "Secured, for now. But the implications. The potential applications of what he was working on are immense and terrifying. Every major government, every international organization with a stake in global stability, is already making inquiries. They want control." I could feel the weight of it, the ethical tightrope Dr. Thorne had walked, the precipice he'd stood on. His vision, whatever it truly was, had been twisted, weaponized. The potential for misuse, for global instability, was staggering. It wasn't just about a murder anymore, it was about the very future of scientific advancement, about corporate responsibility, about the lines humanity was willing to cross for power. "The public reaction will be volatile," I murmured, more to myself than to her. The shock, the anger, the fear, it would all erupt. And then the debate. Should such dangerous knowledge even exist? Who should wield it? The investigator offered a tight, humorless smile. "Volatile is an understatement. This isn't just a scandal, Reed. This is a paradigm shift." The quiet hum of the cooling units seemed to mock the chaos that was about to engulf the world outside. My role, I realized, was far from over. I had uncovered the killer, yes, but the true monster, the corporate entity that had orchestrated this, was still largely hidden. My determination solidified. The aftermath had only just begun. The air, thin and sterile, carried the faintest whisper of formaldehyde, a ghost of preservation. The cooling units hummed a low, constant note, a lullaby for the silent forms resting on their racks. I stood there, long after the others had left, long after the initial reports were filed, long after the formal identification of Thorne's remains was complete. It was the weight of what I had unearthed. The killer, exposed not by a smoking gun, but by a microscopic burn pattern and a specific, almost imperceptible, residue. A colleague, driven by a perverse cocktail of ambition and fear, saw Thorne's research not as a path to progress, but as a shortcut to personal glory, a legacy to be stolen. They had understood Thorne's work, his lab's intricacies, better than anyone, using that intimacy to craft an accident so convincing it nearly fooled everyone. The sophistication of the act, the sheer audacity of it, still left a bitter taste in my mouth. It wasn't just a life taken, it was a future stolen, a scientific frontier tainted. His groundbreaking discoveries promised radical advancements, but they also held the potential for catastrophic misuse. The very brilliance that defined him had also painted a target on his back. It was a world where ethical lines blurred under the harsh glare of ambition, where the pursuit of knowledge could quickly morph into a pursuit of power. The truth, when it finally coalesced, wasn't a sudden flash of insight, but a slow, agonizing assembly of fragments. Each piece of evidence, each interview, each re-examination of the scene had chipped away at the manufactured narrative, revealing the sinister architecture beneath. It wasn't simple greed, it was a profound misunderstanding of scientific stewardship, a belief that certain knowledge was too dangerous to be left in the wrong hands, their definition of wrong, of course, being anyone but themselves. This profound arrogance, this self-appointed right to decide the fate of discovery, was the true horror of the case. The personal toll of this investigation felt heavier than usual. I had seen the raw ambition that could corrupt even the most noble pursuits. I had walked through the wreckage of trust, of collaboration, of shared vision. It changed you, subtly, irrevocably. But standing there, amidst the quiet dignity of the facility, a renewed resolve hardened within me. This work, this meticulous pursuit of justice, wasn't just about solving a case. It was about upholding a fragile balance. It was about ensuring that the silent could speak, that the truth, no matter how inconvenient or ugly, could emerge. It was about drawing a line in the sand, however faint, against the tide of deceit and malfeasance. Thorne's case, for all its complexities, was now closed. The killer was identified, their carefully constructed alibi shattered, their sophisticated deceptions unraveled. The legal process would take its course, but the core mystery had yielded to the relentless logic of evidence. Thorne's legacy would be debated, his research carefully scrutinized, but at least the truth of his death would not be buried with him. Yet, a deeper, more unsettling question remained, a quiet tension that resonated in the cool air of the facility. The struggle between scientific progress and its inherent perils was far from over. Thorne's work had merely exposed a fault line that ran deep beneath the surface of innovation. There would be other breakthroughs, other ambitions, other moments where the human capacity for both creation and destruction would collide. The world outside, I knew, was already spinning new webs of intrigue, new puzzles waiting to be solved. My role, I realized, was simply to keep looking, to keep listening, to keep seeking the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. The hum of the cooling units seemed to intensify, a silent summons to the next challenge.